Hello and welcome to this damnful idealistic crusade. This is going to be the third of my commentary tracks. This time, of course, on the third of the original Bat films, Batman Forever from 1995, directed by Joel Schumacher, and taking over from Tim Burton after the first two Bat films, respectively Batman 1989 and Batman Returns from 1992. It was undertaken as a step away and a directional shift due to Warner Brothers not really appreciating the more adult nature of Batman Returns, and Tim Burton taking it in a completely different direction. So the mandate was to lighten up the franchise, to make it more family-friendly, for lack of a better term, also to appease the merchandisers who were very put off by Batman Returns not being, toy-friendly, particularly McDonald's being the culprit most people like to point out as being the one that freaked out the most over Batman Returns. Unfortunately, this combined with the shift in tone and then the massive problems of the film that came afterwards, Batman and Robin in 1997, and due to that film having a great similarity to Batman Forever, it's caused Batman Forever to really just kind of get lumped in with Batman and Robin, or for people to just not really give it a fair chance. And I've always defended it. It's a film I finally remember from my childhood, so I do have great nostalgia for it. But I grew up on these films, all four of them, just like most people of my age. And I do feel Forever is very underrated. I also want to get into a little bit about the various script drafts, the novelization and comic adaptation that have significant differences. All that this alludes to the fact that there is a longer version of the film that is much darker in a lot of ways and has a lot more of the thematics that are brought up in the film and kind of just dissipate over the runtime. Warner Brothers or someone cut down the film to its just over 2-hour runtime. And but this was pretty late in the game because a lot of the deleted materials and other scenes leaked out into the comic book adaptation. Some of the music videos have some of these deleted scenes, and of course the novelization tries to improve upon the script drafts at every turn, and really does so. And if we had gotten the novelization of Batman Forever written by Peter David on film, it would be a strong contender for one of the best comic book films ever. Because that's an amazing novelization, which I will reference a lot and heartily recommend you check out. It's probably my favorite tie-in novelization of a film ever. Peter David made many, many improvements across the board. So I will link to that in the description below. Also, the script drafts by Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor, who were the original writers, who did meet with Tim Burton a little bit for the original idea of Tim Burton doing a Batman 3, which really just got as far as the Batchelors being hired on and talking with Tim Burton about the notions of Batman and his duality, and coming up with the ideas for who the villains were going to be, and then some preliminary casting discussions, and that was about it. Then later on, before production started, Joel Schumacher brought in Akiva Goldsman, and they worked together before, and then Akiva Goldsman brought in some new ideas, some really great touches, and just kind of, polish some things to Schumacher's satisfaction for the Bachelor's draft, and that's how the film, kind of changed from the original drafts, which are, have most of the narrative drive of what we see in the film, but it is a bit different. So I will link to both of those, which can be found online. And then also, I should mention the Schumacher cut, as is now being called, is being discussed more and more openly ever since Warner Brothers has essentially confirmed there is a long version of the film sitting in the vaults, which is reputedly about 170 minutes long, which is far longer than any version I ever thought would be possible. From my own research, it seems to indicate that there was probably maybe a 2.5-hour version. And again, it's unknown whether this is a work print or a rough cut or was ever finished. But what did finally come out on the 2005 special edition DVD, when they first rumored a long cut of the film, and that's what got teenage me really trying to dig into all this stuff, because it tied back into my memories of growing up, seeing these extra little glimpses of additional content and scenes that were not in the film. But instead of getting a full director's cut, which Schumacher wanted to do, it just never came to pass before his untimely passing just recently. We did get a handful of scenes totaling about 15 or so minutes, but they're all in rough shape with on-set audio, and they're from obviously some sort of work print source. So I'm wondering if maybe that's what's sitting in the vaults at Warner Brothers, and that's why it would run, 170 minutes, because everything would run a little bit long. But it's entirely possible that it's a fully finished 170-minute, almost 3-hour cut of the film, and it really needs to be released in some shape or form. Because myself and a number of the other fans I've talked with before through the years have really wanted to see this come to pass. It would help to defend the film, which again is very underrated, and most people overlook the thematics of the story and what they're trying to do, which really has not been done before or since in a Batman film, to be quite honest. When the 4K releases were announced and there was no news of the longer cut or any additional materials, I started a petition on change.org, which I've done several times and other fans have. That's still ongoing, so I will link to that. We're up to almost 400 signatures. There's now a Schumacher cut Twitter. It's released the Schumacher cut, or hashtag Schumacher cut, which is getting more and more traction, so I will link to that as well. Definitely check that out and head over there and sign up, and hopefully if enough of us can let Warner Brothers know that there is interest for this, and there's no reason to not release it. And it also shouldn't cost very much, particularly not the $30 million price tag of the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which is apparently how much that has cost for the HBO Max of the Snyder Cut. So if we can get the Snyder Cut of Justice League, there's no reason why we cannot get ostensibly the Schumacher cut of Batman Forever. And while I don't think it would, fix every problem of Batman Forever, and I'm not, it's not a perfect film, but I do think it would definitely help to see the film in its original intended version, because it's not just edits that were made to the film. The entire opening was restructured. The original opening was removed. I mean, it's all these little tiny things. And if you read into all the various reports of the years, all you hear of and see referenced all these little scraps of film that were just kind of tossed aside. So it remains to be seen what this 170-minute cut of the film is. And to see a really great compilation of all the deleted materials and cleaned up a little bit, there's a really wonderful fan site, 1995batman.com, especially devoted to Batman Forever, toy reviews, merchandising reviews, and then tons of information from old magazine articles that have been scanned in and uploaded. But they've done a really great job at taking the scenes from the DVD, polishing them up a little bit, and also adding in some of those extra brief glimpses I mentioned before from things like the music video and so on and so forth. And I'll definitely link that in the description below as well. So with that introduction out of the way, again, this one will be a slightly different commentary track, because I will defend the film where I see fit, because I always do. It's an underrated picture. It's not perfect, but I think the story it's trying to tell is very good, and I really appreciate what they tried to do, and I just think it's a vastly underrated picture. And again, I do have great nostalgia for it, but it's not just with me talking with rose-tinted glasses on, but every time I revisit it, I still like a great many things in it. I do wish it was better. I do think the Schumacher director's cut would improve a number of things, but I also think it's unfair to just lump this in with Batman and Robin and talk about nothing else other than nipples on the Batsuit, which again is something I never thought about until it was brought up on the internet, and it's really not that important in the grand scheme of things. So, but with that being said, take whichever version of the film you like and cue it up to the 0 minute, 0 second mark, and we will do a rough sync. Again, it's not exact. This is still I'm still getting used to doing commentary tracks, and this is all off the cuff, and it's a mixture of production notes and talking about the script drafts and the novelization. This one will be talking. I'll be talking especially about a lot of the drop scenes and the resequencing of the opening third and all that stuff, and also a sort of running scene-by-scene commentary with what's going on and some character analysis, things like that. So again, this is very loose, very informal, very off the cuff, and as Sir Roger Moore said in his commentaries, imagine it as a conversation with a friend that's just a trifle one-sided. So with that being said, cue up your copies to the 0 minute, 0 second mark. And in 3, 2, 1, press play. So we have the Warner Shield, and for the first time we are going to do this digital transition shot into the bat symbol. And we get the more somber Elliot Goldenthal theme, who replaced Danny Elfman. Goldenthal's score is really undervalued, I think, and I really love what he does with the new Batman theme. Tim Burton still gets a production credit as a producer, even though he really didn't have anything to do with the film. He kind of signed off on Joel Schumacher taking it over, who didn't want to do it if Tim Burton didn't agree to, passing the reins over. I think Tim Burton, for all interviews, seems to indicate that he was kind of relieved in a way. Now, some people complain about these opening titles. Yes, the names flying towards the screen and everything is a little goofy and definitely dated, but I do love the build of Goldenthal's theme, and when you play this back in a home theater environment, it still really works. I do love the Forever title coming up in green over the bat symbol and the flash into the rest of the film. That's always stuck with me. Although I do miss the fact we don't have a main title sequence that builds like the Burton films. We have the suiting up sequence, which is the first time we really got this in this detail, and it's very nicely done. And I love how Goldenthal's score builds here and builds to the reveal of the new Batmobile. Of course, since we don't have opening titles, we have the much more television-style, titles inside the film, which, they're okay, they're fine, they're very unobtrusive, but I do miss having a proper main title sequence. The reveal here, I think, is one of the big, gotcha moments, although some are not too big on the design of the Batmobile. And then here's the line about the joke about I'll get drive-through, which, again, was pretty much designed for the commercials everybody likes to label. But this was not the original opening of the film. Originally, we open with the Two-Face escape from Arkham Asylum, where he ostensibly kills a guard and breaks out of the ceiling but leaves a message saying the Bat must die, ostensibly in the guard's blood. Much darker opening, and then we go to the Bruce Wayne tour of Wayne Enterprises, introduction to Edward Nigma, the Riddler setup, and when the bat signal goes off, it's to get to this sequence of Two-Face trying to rob the second bank of Gotham. So when you get to the Batcave, it's actually a good ways into the film, and Bruce gets in the chair, takes the pneumatic tube down to the Batcave, and then we have the suit-up sequence, the Batmobile reveal, and then the I'll get drive-through line, which is actually part of the whole Bruce-Alfred banter that usually gets dialed out of the films. In some of the script drafts and in the novelization, they have a bit more banter back and forth. So it's supposed to be this sort of, back and forth witty repartee that they have. But in the film, you just get the one line that irks everybody. Here we are introduced to Two-Face. The reveal of the Rick Baker makeup is held until the camera pans around. And Tommy Lee Jones, you can see why Joel Schumacher wanted to cast him, but Two-Face is the one character that doesn't really work in the film. And I don't think it's just the fact that Tommy Lee Jones always publicly said that he didn't really read comic books, didn't get the idea of the character. I think that if you read the script drafts, no one really knew what to do with Two-Face, and he's just kind of there as a plot advancement. The Bachelors were writing this primarily for the Riddler, but everybody insisted that Two-Face was the next one that they should do, and to keep to the two-villain formula established in Batman Returns. So structurally, their idea was to give Batman a villain in Two-Face, and then give Bruce Wayne a villain in Edward Nigma / the Riddler, which thematically works, but Two-Face still doesn't really seem like Two-Face doesn't have a lot to do, which I think is the real problem, and thus he doesn't really come across as himself. So here Batman is introduced to Chase Meridian, the new character for the film, the love interest, completely made up for this film, not from the comics. Interestingly, she's a psychiatrist, which means, Bruce or Batman should stay, 9 million miles away. But it's an interesting idea that sets up a lot of things, but it doesn't. The film doesn't really go very far with them, which is unfortunate, and is one of the main things in the novelization that Peter David really builds on, and something I hope the Schumacher cut, or the longer version of the film, would have a little bit more of, since it's apparently 170 minutes. Some of her actions here in the film don't really, jibe very well, and it's like some things in the film that are a little bit overdone or overplayed, which I can understand people having a problem with, but it doesn't detract from the rest of the film and the thematics being really interesting. Now, Val Kilmer's performance is really undervalued. He's definitely the most underrated of all the actors to play Bruce and Batman. His look in the cowl is really great. And if you look at the design of the main bat suit in this film shown here, I think it's probably the best standard bat suit we've ever gotten on screen. Everything looks great. It looks wonderful. He moves well, and you can tell they made some improvements since Returns, and probably it's a little bit easier to work in, although still you're covered in, 40 pounds of black rubber. Now, some people like to complain that in this film you have more of the 66 television show creeping in. There are some tilted shots, some Dutch angles and things, which you get, but it's still got a dark tone to it. This is not, yes, it's technically more family friendly, but, a lot of people die. Bruce is haunted by psychological trauma and repressed memories. It's actually despite all the neon and the color, it is beautifully shot, and it does have a lot of dark moments visually in addition to the neon. But again, the Batman and Robin association and the colors and it being different from the Burton film, all this stuff kind of works against it. And again, people don't really give it a fair shot, I don't think. Here's the first major action sequence, and as you can see, this is much more active than any of the action we got in the Burton films. And that's one thing you can't say about the two Schumacher-directed films, is that their action isn't a lot more active. Batman uses a number of his gadgets, and coming up here in a little bit, you'll see that the thug is going for the elevator, and Batman actually saves him. So this is really the establishment of the no-kill Batman. Now, it's not really expressly stated, but the novelization has a little bit of internal dialogue where Batman realizes, he could have almost killed a guy and that he doesn't kill. And so it's really great to get something with more comic accuracy on the screen, and it's not talked about very much because it's in Batman Forever. Now, the trap is sprung, and, it's definitely a death trap, but, even the comics are filled with death traps, so that's not an issue, really. The guard here, the performance, everybody likes to complain about his line ratings being, kind of very much over the top. And while I agree, it's sort of in a goofy, charming way, as opposed to the extra later on in the Nigma Tech Party sequence who goes, "It's Batman," when he does the crash through the window skylight, being, way too much. Two-Face has this great monologue here where he's just leering over everyone, and there's a number of cut bits in this whole sequence in terms of Two-Face's dialogue. The lines like, "If the Bat wants to play, we'll play," and then later on, especially, "You're a killer too," to Batman, which sticks with him through the rest of the film. Again, this is more of the stuff that was cut out of the various script drafts, but really pops up in the novelization. So if you read the comic adaptation, I think it's probably a lot closer to what the original film would have been like, in terms of it does have a lot of the deleted scenes still in there, but it's still, rather close to what we've got from the 1995 theatrical release. But I do think the longer cut probably has even more. And while I don't think it's going to live up to what you get in the novelization, because Peter David was able to just, rework everybody's stuff and try and improve on it across the board, I do think the longer version of the film will play better, particularly with the original sequencing restored. It is nice that you're able to jump right into an action scene and just, get right into the thick of things. And the whole opening still works, but I think it would be much better if we opened with the Arkham Asylum opening as originally intended. The new and improved Bat Grapple that can hold an entire safe. And yes, this is a little bit silly, but there's nothing in this film that really 100% breaks the believability rule outside of maybe this, and then most especially the Batmobile going up the side of the building, which was a last-minute thing that Joel Schumacher wanted to do, because originally it was just the Batmobile going off a bridge and then doing the jumping over rooftops, which is pretty much what happens in Batman Begins, and actually goes all the way back to the Tom Mankiewicz 1982-83 Batman screenplay. So it's something everybody always seemingly wants to have the Batmobile going around on rooftops. But so they sort of get to it here, but I mean, it's a little on the goofy side, but again, I don't mind it unless I'm like really going with my reality glasses on. Now, as we're soaring through the new Gotham, you get more of the new design shown off. And in this film, you have a mixture of model work and, of course, CGI, and mostly under the direction of John Dykstra, the legendary special effects guru, probably most famous for inventing the Dykstra Flex and working on the original Star Wars. So, it is this point where we're in the mid 90s and we're blending the two, model work and CGI. And it is nice that we have a new visual style for the film. And it's never boring, for sure. You can't label it that, but it is somewhat still linked to the Burton films. It's not a completely different thing. I gotta admit, I love this gag here where Two-Face shoots his own pilot because Batman's cape appears on the front, and it's a nice character moment that doesn't get brought up very much. And Tommy Lee Jones does throw himself into every scene, but you can tell. I don't think it's the performance of the direction. Batman coming through here and the voice coming up, "You need help, Harvey," never fails to get to me. Now here, there's an extra little bit that you can see in the deleted scenes on the DVD and such, where the line "You're a killer too," which is the key line of the opening sequence, which was cut out for some random reason, that sets up the film with the Batman / Bruce feeling the guilt over what happened to Harvey Dent and how he feels it's his fault, and is thus extremely conflicted every time he has to go up against Two-Face. First, you have the yin and yang parachute, and then the helicopter crashes into the side of the face of Lady Gotham, which is not something everybody gets the first time. It took me a while to realize that it's specifically, carving a Two-Face into, a version of the Statue of Liberty. And Batman has tried, but he failed anyway. Now, this scene with the Goldenthal score, Batman coming up slowly through the water, is one of my favorite scenes of the whole film. It's a great little transitional bit, and then he breaks the water, and you get the shot of the scarred face, and it's a great moment because, despite a valiant effort last night by Batman, he still failed, and he's still racked with guilt over it. Here's a shot panning through the new Gotham, and again, a lot of the CGI, it's laid out well. It doesn't necessarily hold up to great scrutiny, but still, at least, it's well done for the time period, and still mixed with practical effects and practical sets and everything. Here's the Wayne Enterprises tour. We're introduced to Edward Nigma, who is given a completely new backstory and character and is set up as the Bruce Wayne villain of the film. And the Riddler of the comics really did not have a good or proper backstory or origin, so this is actually a really interesting idea, and I love everything they do with the Riddler character. Unfortunately, because everybody knows Jim Carrey for his style and his shtick and things, it usually gets labeled that he kind of overshadows the film and he's just doing Jim Carrey, much like people say Jack Nicholson's just doing Jack in Batman '89 as Joker. However, it's far more nuanced than that, and you can even see it in this scene as Nigma runs through all these different emotions. He's obviously geeky, he's obviously socially inept, he's Bruce Wayne is the subject of his idolization and hero worship, and there are all these little notes and things that show you that this guy is already off kilter in a number of ways, and it just will take the slightest push to knock him off, which of course does happen. Of course, originally this is going to be interrupted by the bat signal, taking Bruce as Batman to stop Two-Face at the Bank of Gotham. But due to the reshuffling, this has already been moved around, and it still works. But it makes a lot more sense because, and it's also a lot better because in the theatrical release, Bruce gets called away and creates the Riddler because of the silly scene where Chase Meridian uses the bat signal as a beeper, and it's like, well, that wasn't a good trade-off, was it? Again, you can see Nigma's Jim Carrey having this real forceful determination, and it's several different sides of this character. And then Val does really interesting things with Bruce, as you see he has the front, and then he also asks pointed questions about the machine as you can see the wheels in his head turning while he's doing all these little bits of business, and then does the quick glance to the bat signal. So this is a more polished Bruce. This is a more multifaceted Bruce than what we got with the Keaton version, because this Bruce has more of the public persona. He's the chair of Wayne Enterprises, but he's still psychologically damaged under the surface. Now here's the break between the two, where Nigma demands that he receive fulfillment from his great idol, his hero, and Bruce responds as anyone would, although you would think somebody could wait 5 minutes to go through the channels properly because they're actually getting a semi-positive response from their boss. And then this is taken as rejection. This is one of the moments where I totally think that any argument that Jim Carrey is not doing a great performance here, the way that he changes on the line reading to, "I'll make you understand." I mean, that could be straight out of a serial killer movie or something. And like Selina in Batman Returns, the Nigma characterization in this film has many different layers and facets, whether it's Nigma pre-changeover, Riddler, Nigma and his "I'm trying to be just like Bruce Wayne" thing. There's many different facets. Now here you have the really cool, if a bit probably impractical, pneumatic tube all the way down to the Batcave. But, if anyone could pull something off like this, it would be Batman. And this, of course, would have been the original opening, where we would then go from this scene to the suiting up to the Batmobile and the bank scene. But here we have this transition shot of the Batmobile and the score, so that's how they disguised it. And we have a pan up through, again, New Gotham with its new design with some more color, but you see it's still quite dark, and it's a mixture of models and CG. So it's not a complete departure from either Burton film, but it is its own entity. Now here is the bat signal as beeper. I don't mind this scene, but it's a little too much. Like Chase Meridian coming out and pretty much her. She's so scantily clad in her underwear and stuff. It's like, as Batman says, direct, aren't you? If it wasn't, if she wasn't quite like that and totally throwing herself at him at that degree, I think it would play fine. I think that adds a little too much. And the novelization, like I said, one of the best things that Peter David did was to tone this stuff down and make it more believable, and it being, she's fascinated at first because she's a psychiatrist, and it's like, the could be the greatest scoop of her career, and to analyze Batman, and then eventually she starts to feel guilty over this, and she also does the same, want to analyze for Bruce Wayne, so she basically does the same to both. Again, the idea of the character is fine. The performance is fine. It's just some of the stuff in the film is just a bit much. But that being said, the closed offness of Batman is still there from the Burton films. And I like what Val does in the performance and the hesitation and the closed offness. Direct, aren't you? And the look of this film, of course, Joel Schumacher always said that he was trying to make a comic book come to life. And in a lot of ways, I mean, he really achieved it. The lighting of this film, the usage of more color, but it's still in a realistic setting of sorts without feeling very stagey, as Batman and Robin really kind of does, unfortunately. I do think the new 4K master does really help a lot. It's a better transfer, and the film needed a new transfer because the old Blu-ray was not all that great. The 4K does restore a lot of the darkness, and this film does have darkness in its looks. You can see here Batman in the Batmobile. The rest of the cockpit is in shadow. So I think all the subtle work they did, people will say this is too much like the 66 show. There are, like I said before, there's a handful of Dutch tilted shots, which is like a nod to the TV show, but it's also like certain panels in a comic book that are done in stylized ways to add more punch. And of course, again, the usage of color throughout. Everybody will always label it as being, neon everything, but it's not really. There's interesting backlighting, there's interesting color going on everywhere, but it's not overwhelming everything. So I think it's a very interesting stylistic approach that should be lauded instead of criticized. And they weren't giving you the same thing over and over again, at the very least. This is the birth of the Riddler and revolving around Nigma's 3D television device known as the box, which, this is all believable enough that a inventor goes kooky enough to have an impromptu a human trial, and it goes horribly wrong, except an interesting side effect. So this is where we really get into where a lot of people are going to label this as Jim Carrey doing Jim Carreyisms, but I think that can be really explained by the neural overload of the box itself. And because before this, we hadn't had any real sign of the, like the guy's grabbed a live wire and he's going 9,000 miles a minute. So I totally am on board with the character shift, because again, it can be totally attributed to the box totally frying his brain, which of course it does eventually by the end, but totally making everything in his head run at a ridiculous speed and on overdrive, which is then why he's on overdrive for the rest of the film. So story-wise, it actually does make sense, and he's not just doing Jim Carreyisms, because people will link this to Ace Ventura or The Mask, which he had done before Batman Forever. But, if you look at all three of those characterizations side by side, there is a difference, and there is a character here. So I do think that's unfair, and unfair to the performance especially. And of course, you can tell he had a field day doing this, so much so that it was, later reported that Tommy Lee Jones had the great line where he just went up to Jim one day. He's like, "I can't stand you. I cannot tolerate your buffoonery." And here, when he takes off the head rig, it's again, now Nigma is different. He's not doing the screaming and shouting anymore. He's talking supposedly rationally, but you can tell now he's completely unhinged, and his brain has been forever addled. Also, I should point out, it's really hilarious, I think, that the original box, if you look there on the right, it's literally just a blender stuck on top. So it's all cobbled together, and yes, he's totally kooky, and he's tied Stickley up with the extension cord. And here is where we get the point of no return, where Nigma has gone so far over the edge that he is now going to commit murder and literally send his hated boss over the edge. Throughout the whole film, he has such gusto, and it's still something I really, really enjoy. So again, I really hate it when people just write off the whole performance as it's Jim Carrey doing Jim Carrey. Again, I think that's really unfair, because I think with this origin and this whole direct connection and eventual hatred and wanting to destroy Bruce Wayne, I think it gives Riddler such a personal motive. I love this bit here. So now we transition to a similar scene as we got in the Burton films, where Bruce is always just sitting around watching his rear projection screen in Wayne Manor. We do get a recreation of the creation of Two-Face in the courtroom. It admittedly is a little silly that Batman just charges up in full costume in the courthouse, but that is pretty similar to the original comic origin. You can see even here how much more that Bruce is still pensive, but we get to the examination of Stickley's death, but Bruce is fully integrated in the moment, as opposed to the Keaton Bruce, which would have been a lot more disaffected. I find this a little bit hilarious, where Nigma is totally playing up his emotional baggage and how he can't bear to work here anymore about the boss that he hated so much and murdered. And then he has the suicide note. You'll find it's his handwriting, which matches his sentence structure exactly. I found it in my cubicle. Sentence structure. It's a darkly funny moment, which there are a number of those in this film, and it just doesn't get the credit for it. And it's played just right, and it doesn't go too far over. It is amazing, though, that Nigma could create such a perfect, computer forgery in '95. But again, he's now extraordinarily smart. Now, the suicide note is hysterical when you read it. From Stickley, Ari, my suicide, goodbye, cruel world. I just love how it says, subject, my suicide. It's like, it's one of those really blink and you miss it, darkly funny moments that I love in this film. I do like how Bruce demands that Stickley's family get put on the insurance plan, even though it doesn't cover suicide. So something doesn't sit well with him, and he's already covering the family. So already he's showing his humanity there, which is a really great touch that I very much appreciate. We have the first of the riddles, and I like the design of them, that each one is cobbled together, obviously by as film will say later, by a wacko. I like that Bruce figures out the riddle and actually uses his brain on screen, which is a really nice thing, because in Batman films, you rarely get the Dark Knight detective doing any detecting. And by the end of the film, when all the riddles are put together, I adore the fact that Bruce and Alfred solve them. And there's also some extra detective stuff that was in the deleted materials, which was dropped. So there was even more of that originally. Now we're at Eddie's apartment, and here we have the really wonderful usage of the song by the Flaming Lips, which was on the accompanying music from / inspired by soundtrack CD that sold like a bajillion copies. And it's one of the really great examples of that form of merchandising that really took off in the 90s, and probably kind of got started by the Prince album for Batman 89. I love the production design of Eddie's apartment here, and we have the fortune teller in the beginner Riddler costume, which is what will give him the idea for the classic question mark suit Riddler costume. So I appreciate that all this stuff is there, and it's not just made by magic. And we get to see him making the second riddle, which is really cool to see, but it's also like, did anybody think about fingerprints maybe? I love the kooky touch that he's got this little moped that he just goes all the way out to Wayne Manor on, and then does his, I'm just going to ride off again. It's our first glimpse of the exterior of the new Wayne Manor. They changed locations, and I like this one. It feels a lot more classical, and I like the long drive, and I like the big statues outside. I like that this is at fall, and you have the trees with the falling leaves and everything. I think the exterior of Wayne Manor in Forever and Batman and Robin, of course, because it uses the same thing, has a lot more presence than the exterior of Wayne Manor in the Burton films. I love this little transitional scene where you have Bruce in a classic car, but dressed very somber in shades, and he's got this whole vibe, and you have the very light refrain of the Batman theme. That I like how the camera even pivots here as he goes up to the desk, because this is setting up his first meeting with Dr. Chase Meridian, where we get elements of his psyche that are going to start to be doled out. And again, the tilted shots here do suggest the flashback sequences that we get glimpses of, but were much more of an entity in the uncut version. I do like this scene. I like the whole thing of Bruce breaking down the door, but it does make it a bit obvious. So billionaire playboy hears a noise and just busts down the door. But I think the playing of this and the awkwardness does help that. And I like when he picks up the door and he has to try and put it back up. I like the way that Val plays this. So I think it undercuts the whole dude just broke a door. Is he Batman? But that gets brought back up again where Bruce commits a faux pas and looks at the Rorschach blot and, you have a thing for bats? People see what they want to see. It's a Rorschach. Oh, whoops. I much prefer the Bruce and Chase scenes because they're much more direct and she's not standing around in her underwear throwing herself at a guy. She actually seems much more like a, intelligent person. Here you have the Bruce mask and the inner Bruce sort of meshing together in this scene where it's the external Bruce that everyone else in the world sees, but he's also having to talk about himself, and he starts to talk about the things that still haunt him, which comes up more later on. But, it doesn't take a psychiatrist to see that there's more going on under the surface there, and that he is definitely hiding something, and there is a mask and a mechanism of sorts. And if you look at this, there's not a lot of color going on. The lighting is wonderful. The set looks wonderful. I love the browns and the yellows. So again, not everything in Batman Forever is neon and nipples on the Batsuit and all that stuff. And I love how Goldenthal weaves the score in and out very, very subtly in a lot of these dialogue sequences. I think the Goldenthal score is really underrated and undervalued. And I love all the new themes he came up for, particularly the main Batman theme. And I love how he uses it for Bruce's trauma. And it's just, I love the way that's woven in. I like that he picks up the Dream Warden and she says, "You look so sad." And then the mask comes back. Why would I? And I like that they leave this unresolved. Although the line about "I've got to get you out of this clothes into a dress," it's like it's a bit of a strange way to say, "Hey, you want to go to the charity ball circus?" Which will transition us to the Gotham Hippodrome and the circus scene. Of course, you would have known probably what he's talking about if you caught the little inference from the line from his secretary about, Gossip Gertie's called a record 32 times. Who are you going to take to the charity circus? Well, now we're back to color everywhere, which again, for this is wonderful. This is, a very visual thing because a lot of times, there's not a whole lot you can do with a circus on screen for just one scene or two. And, the set is not the most giant circus tent in the world, but it's a very visually interesting set. And here back in Eddie's cramped apartment, there's not a lot of color going on. So the color is very selective. It's not wall-to-wall neon like the film always gets labeled as being. And we're going to have the introduction of Dick Grayson. The origin of Robin is actually very closely followed by this film. We do have the Flying Graysons. We do have his family being murdered and, his essentially then birthing his desire for revenge. Of course, the difference being that, originally they weren't shot down. It wasn't Two-Face. Dick Grayson was a young boy instead of, someone who's practically college age. A lot of people like to find fault with that. I don't really mind all that much because this was after the animated series had established the college age Dick Grayson, who was Robin and would also be in college. And, I don't mind it. And I think Chris O'Donnell is actually very good as Robin and Dick Grayson in this film for the characterization they came up with. It feels realistic enough, although, one wishes there had been, the fully comic accurate Dick Grayson. But again, I don't mind the change. I understand why they did it. And of course, this was the time they finally got Robin in after the mini script drafts for both previous films worked him in pretty much until the 11th hour both times. Here we have the discussion where Bruce realizes that Chase is totally obsessed with Batman. There's a great line in the novelization where he's like, "Oh, not again." And then the slight allusion to, "Oh, I forgot myself for a second." So the notion of duality is always there. And of course, this little bit sets up the fact that Dick Grayson is an extraordinarily talented acrobat, so of course that would make him a phenomenal Robin. So you already know that he is skilled and talented without having to, see a fight scene to start with. And with the lights being out, that's when Two-Face makes his move and makes the transition. There's another bit in the novelization where Batman is reviewing all the stuff from Arkham, and he's looking for any clues that Two-Face may have left about where he might strike next. And Chase manages to say the same thing that Two-Face says in an interview tape. And before Two-Face comes out, Bruce realizes that Two-Face is going to strike the circus at any minute. So he tries to get out of there and is stopped. So again, there's many things in the novelization that are so worth your time. And I love the way that Bruce freezes there because he knows that voice. And he's trying to figure out already. You see Val looking around. So Bruce is already trying to figure out, okay, how can he get out? He has to get the bat suit. He's got to do something. But, he's kind of in over his head. And he has no real options. This on being televised on Gotham's CNN gives, of course, Edward the impetus to create an identity of his own, which originally he did in the early script drafts and the Bachelor version, and was actually present at the circus and stole his costume from a fortune-telling leprechaun and was in the middle of all this. But I actually prefer it much more that he stays home and watches it on TV, which also ties into the whole television aspect of the film later on with the box. But Tommy Lee Jones does have great moments in this film. This is one of them. When he gets these great monologues, something to sink his teeth into, it really does work. I think, again, the problem is more with the writing of Two-Face just doesn't really seem or feel like Two-Face. Now, Bruce trying to give himself up here, I like as an element of self-sacrifice, and him trying to yell over the crowd. Again, it's supposed to be suspension of disbelief that it's buried by the crowd. Some people have problems with it because it's very clear in the mix, and it's like, how did Chase or anybody next to him not hear him say that? But again, I don't mind it. I like that it shows that he's helpless, but he's still trying, and he is prepared to sacrifice himself, but realizes that's not going to work, so he has to do anything he can. And at first, he goes up to try and reach the bomb, but then sees the Graysons swing into action. So he realizes that then he can try and go for Two-Face instead and make it a two-pronged attack. So again, this is a Bruce that's using his brain and acting as Batman, but without the bat suit. And he's having to camouflage all this. So he's taking a real risk when he gets down on the circus floor and starts fighting Two-Face's goons in the open. And again, I'm going to mention the novelization a lot, but there's a wonderful added bit where right before Two-Face fires the final bullet, because they've staged it in the novelization, Peter David did, that the Graysons managed to catch each other. They're all hanging off of each other, and Two-Face shoots a second time, which is the bullet that goes through the wire that kills them. But Bruce sees this and knocks down a thug and has a gun in his hand and could shoot Two-Face, but holds himself back and just throws the gun instead. So then he feels guilt that he didn't take Two-Face out with a gun because of the no-gun rule. Here you do have a similar thing where Bruce is left helpless, and it's linked visually into his trauma that he's still dealing with from his parents' death. And in this close-up here, you really get that because he's just left kind of standing there, and there was nothing really that he could have done. even ostensibly as Batman. So that feeling of helplessness just adds to the guilt and adds to his trauma, and it directly mirrors the death of his parents, which is why later on, two shots, screams out of the night, I killed them. It's a sort of psychological transference that he does without even thinking, which really shakes Alfred. I really love this shot here where Dick comes back thinking he's going to be a hero, and you can just see, the total broken man there, and all Bruce can do is stand down there. And then in a nice moment, you see all the members of the circus come up in a sort of circle, which does feel like a Tim Burton-y moment, but it's a very somber thing. It's very funeral-like. And again, this is, pretty much right out of the comic origin of Robin, which is very much appreciated that they did that. Better view of the new Wayne Manor. Bruce just looks so cool in this movie. He looks like he's so much more together on the outside, where, of course, on the inside, he's even more messed up than we saw in Batman or Batman Returns. But at least the public front is a bit more put together, Again, this was originally designed as a Return sequel, started out that way, being written for Michael Keaton, who eventually dropped out. But they did keep enough of the iconography, so this is a Return sequel at its core, and that helps you understand where they're going with it, if I'm really honest. I like that Dick is already just completely driven and is just ready to leave and go kill Two-Face. That's it. I love the character arc, and again, I don't mind that he's a bit older because I love the looks and the nuances that Michael Gough has as Alfred in this film, and even Batman and Robin. I think that Alfred is given more to do in these films than the Burton films, and you can get a real sense of Alfred much more in these. Here, Bruce is immediately going on about, killing Two-Face won't take the pain away. Again, not something that you are supposed to get in the family-friendly Batman movie. And there was the name drop about Metropolis. Circus must be halfway to Metropolis by now, which is a great nod to the rest of the DC universe and made everybody in 95 go, oh my God, he's talking about Superman. Wow. I like that he keeps trying ways to keep Dick here, and finally he's going to let him go his own way, but he just says, you better fill up. There's not a gas station around here for miles. And had Dick Grayson just gone on, his life would have been still normal, but he was sucked in by the bike museum. I love the idea that Bruce just has all these, and they're all these iconic classic motorcycles, and he collects them, and he just has them there, but he doesn't really do anything with them. Alfred's a pretty good mechanic, but some of these need a lot of work. It's like he goes through the motions, so this is like the replacement for the armory in Batman 89, the scene with all the suits of armor, which does show his intent on learning about cars and motorcycles for his days as Batman. But also, I just like the fact that all this stuff is there, and, it's like the super rich guy with the awesome garage, and it's also the perfect setup to tempt Dick Grayson into staying. Right down to Alfred just bringing out the beautifully laden tray, and Dick's really hungry, hasn't eaten all night. And then Novelization has a great line, Dick Grayson knew when he was beaten. If you're watching this on Laserdisc, that's where the first side break was. Now here is one of the really great moments where Bruce gets all introspective, and this is again setting up the flashbacks that are teased throughout the film, which lead to him remembering his parents' wake, and the Red Book, which is his father's journal, alluding to the meaning of the film being about Bruce dealing with his guilt from childhood, where he represses the memory that he felt guilty over his parents' death because he thought that he was responsible for it. Because he also read it in the journal saying that he insisted that they go to a movie that he wanted to see. I love the fact that you don't see the killer, that, we're just getting flashes of stuff, and it's like the pieces of a traumatic event that, a child would remember. And so it has a sort of fantasy element, which again comes from it being very dreamlike. And this is all tinted blue with the blue fire, and we have the tilted shots and the backlighting and the shadows. A lot of this imagery is right out of a number of comics. Joel Schumacher really was a fan of Batman Year One and a number of the great, darker, modern Batman stories. In fact, he wanted to do a film version of Batman Year One, but Warner Brothers refused. And had he gotten to do the fifth film after Batman and Robin, it would have been, a far darker film, much more in tone with this film, and much more in tone with what Joel Schumacher wanted to do. So again, I think it's been extremely unfair to label Schumacher with a lot of this, oh, he lightened everything up and so on and so forth, and nipples on the batsuit, when the reality is a lot more complicated than that. Now here we have this scene where Bruce actually says, "I killed them," which is the sign of his psyche. He's talking about the guilt over his parents' death, and there's some slight transference to seeing Two-Face kill Dick Grayson's parents. And again, Alfred has so much more to do here. The way he responds to this, it's like it's that line that you never get in the film. That's in a number of drafts. You are a great man, but you are not maybe the most sane man. I also really, 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 truly appreciate the fact that in the Schumacher films, and I guess this maybe was an Akiva Goldsman thing, that Alfred calls Bruce Master Bruce instead of Mr. Wayne. It's such a more personal touch from the man who is ostensibly Bruce's father figure, and is the closest thing he has to a father, and technically is his father in so many different ways. I love this scene where, again, Michael Gelf has a lot more to do, and you see how he tries to guide and shepherd Dick Grayson, and you can draw the parallel with this is what he must have obviously done with young Bruce through the years. Been there, been the supporting figure, tried to set them on the path they're trying to go on and keep them from falling into the abyss of depression or vengeance or anger and so on and so forth, but staying out of the way, trying to just be the guide instead of, having them on a leash. And again, the lighting here is really nice. There's a lot of darkness and shadow, particularly in the faces, and it shows Dick's inner turmoil. Again, it's a really nice scene. It's quite somber, like most of the dialogue scenes in this film. So again, this is not happy-go-lucky, everything neon, family-friendly Batman. If you really sit and look at it, it has a lot of straight parallels from Batman Returns, because again, it was originally designed as a straight Batman Returns sequel. Goldenthal's very heroic Batman march. And this is the Two-Face chasing after Batman in the Batmobile scene, which originally would have come at a different place. And, in all the other versions, Two-Face is just waiting in a car. But here they added him pushing the baby stroller, which I guess is a nod to maybe the French Connection car chase. It's a little bit silly, but he does shoot an RPG at the Batmobile, and again takes out more of his thugs, which is sort of a recurring thing in the film. Now again, this is a little bit on the goofier side, so again, I can understand people thinking that the whole film is like this or labeling it as such. But again, it's not boring. You have all these vintage 50s cars loaded with goons with neon Tommy guns and flames coming out of the wheels, because I don't know why, but it's an interesting visual. Again, it's not boring. So, these are like super version of the Joker mobile cars. You do at least get Two-Face always referring to himself as we and the two. So that is nice that they did keep that all the way through, although the Two-Face in this film is much more the traditional, comic book villain who's just super villainous because he's villainous and he has the basic backstory. But again, I think that's because it seemed like a lot of the writers didn't really know how to handle Two-Face, and here is the scene a lot of people like to complain about. I mentioned before with the Batmobile going up the side of the building. This was a Joel Schumacher visual idea added last minute, and it is a nice visual, but it's very, it would have to be one heck of a strong winch and gargoyle to, be able to do this. Although, the Fast and the Furious sequels do stuff far sillier and less realistic than this, every time they make a new one. So I can understand people having issues, but it is an interesting visual. I like how the flames chase it up the side of the building. And this is pretty much, like the Batmobile on the rooftops that everybody wanted to do until they finally did it in Batman Begins. So yeah, I can admit it's a bit much. I do like how Two-Face just stands on the ground and screams into the night. Now it's Eddie trying to create his identity, and this is a fun, quirky scene where he's trying to put everything together, come up with things. The puzzler. It's that right layer of believability and goofiness that, it's like anybody trying to do this would be silly because it's a silly thing trying to come up with a costumed secret identity. Question mark, man. And then he looks over and then sees the suit and creates the idea of the Riddler. So it's not just Deus Ex Machina, it's something that's really there and it's believable. So that's very much appreciated. Of course, this being Two-Face's hideout, it seemed pretty obvious that this would be Two-Face's hideout. I love the set. I love the layout of this. The whole taking the two different sides to extremes. I mean, it's wonderfully done. I would say if any scene is like the 66 show, it would be this one. I think Two-Face in this film does come across much more like a villain from the television series because there's not a whole lot in characterization outside the original setup. So that's the one place where I think you could label the whole Batman 66 television moniker. And there were some villain sets that, do remind you of this, but the production design here is really, really lovely. And they did take the idea and run with it. And we also have his mistresses, Sugar and Spice. And in the original drafts, they were called Leather and Lace, but that was, too much for the studio, so it was changed. It's nice, it's fun, it's quirky, but again, it kind of undercuts Two-Face being a serious villain. And then the Riddler just walks in. If you wonder how he got there, there was originally extra dialogue which showed how smart the Riddler is because he traced all elements of duality to realize where Two-Face was hidden, although you would think that Batman would have already done the same thing. But, all these ridiculous links about, it had to be... He traced him by all the orders of two, all the elements of latitude and longitude of two, and all this stuff. So he's come here to propose the alliance and unite without knowing the enemy of Bruce Wayne, the enemy of Batman, who, of course, the same person, and Riddler is unaware of this. I like that he tries to play the different sides of Two-Face by speaking loudly, speaking softly, and just being in the moment. And he tries to appeal to the psychotic side and the rationalizing side. So it's a fun scene, and Jim Carrey gives it the energy that it needs. And again, you get the wonderful usage of color. So, this does literally feel like it's popped off a panel of a comic book page. So, again, visually, it's never boring. I love how Two-Face is just like, eh. See, Two-Face does have some fun bits in this film, even if it's not the comic accurate Two-Face we all would want. So here we see the Riddler properly for the first time. So again, this is another facet of Edward Nigma's psyche that's fragmented and grown and exploded since he's basically been, ODing his brain on brainwaves. There were some extra little bits, like with Edward Nigma's landlady, where he's testing his improved box and grows even smarter, and which is pretty much what he does here with Sugar and Spice to demonstrate the box to Two-Face. moments like that, and at the end of this scene where Two-Face does the coin flip and, will kill Riddler if it lands tails, that's where you see Two-Face as more dangerous, but it's only in little flashes. I love that he gives Two-Face a taste of the box, and Two-Face enjoys it. And it's also cool because this is a Warner Brothers film that Sugar and Spice are looking at classic Looney Tunes on the box. Now, this little bit sets up another deleted scene that was dropped once they're on Claw Island, that they're all sitting around taking essentially hits off the box and, basically alluding to it as, being drug addicts. And it's also very faint, but you can hear a slight, bone effect when the box gets removed, like their head is literally growing, which you see a little bit in the finale where Riddler is, the makeup's different, the suit's different, but his head is actually a little bit bigger. Although you got to wonder, did he do his own hair? Because his hair is always different. How did he get that haircut? I love how Two-Face goes through all the negative actions of the Riddler, and then, we're going to kill you if this lands tails, and Riddler's like, oh, crap, I didn't think about that, which is something that's expressly said in the novelization. Again, the novelization improves on every little aspect. So, of course, it landed heads, and we get to the crime spree. Now, I do think it's a little cheesy how this is the costume jewelry props here are just obviously not real, but otherwise it's okay, I guess. Okay, this is admittedly silly. The whole notion of trying to set up Dick as his own person, that's fine, but this whole sequence with him doing his laundry, okay, we get that he's an acrobat and he would do all kinds of stuff normally, like walk on his hands, but this whole thing with the wash foo, I mean, no, that's just a bit much. It's like, yeah, I know wash foo. And of course, the very cheesy 90s rock on the soundtrack for a second. Yes, Alfred, your new award is a new character. So this is the casino robbery scene, which had a few little bits that were in some of the trailers and things that was part of the deleted materials, where this little bit established where Riddler tries to punch a guy and it doesn't work, and Two-Face just is disgusted, and then Riddler basically pulls out his cane and then beats a guy down instead. And this montage is a little bit silly. You have Two-Face and Riddler with a tiara and pearl necklaces on. But I mean, it's silly. It's a little bit quirky, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't go too far. But if you ever wonder why Batman's just like, oh, I'm not gonna solve these crimes, I'm not gonna go stop them. Well, originally there was an extra scene, part of the deleted materials, which you can see some of on the DVD, where the Riddler hacks into the GCPD computer system to send Batman, false information. So he shows up at different places thinking that it's Riddler and Two-Face, and it's, of course, not. The scene they shot, he shows up to a hair salon. There's another scene described in some of the other script drafts and the novelization where he shows up to an opera house, and all the attendees are robbed while they're hooked up to the box, and then it gets turned off and they look up and Batman's standing there and they're like, what? So yeah, originally Batman was just lured away by the Riddler, which was really a nice thing, and they should have kept it in, because otherwise you're wondering, well, where the heck was Batman? Was he just, having a night in? Dick is questioning the Silver Closet, which is the entrance to the Batcave in this Wayne Manor, or one of them, and, shows his intelligence. He knows it's the only locked door. Now it's Nigma breaking ground on Claw Island and publicly announcing his box to spread it around. And again, he's revamped his look and is totally basing it on Bruce Wayne, which is a subtle thing you don't maybe get the first time and a lot of people miss, but he's trying to ape Bruce Wayne in every way, right down to the hairstyle. And later on, he'll even have the Bruce Wayne style glasses. This, of course, being a riff with the box on the classic TV rule, Rot Your Brain. Although you'd think anybody would notice the giant green trails of stuff in the sky, all going to Claw Island. And you really kind of don't get a lot of stuff about, Two-Face helping him steal production capital. It just kind of happens, and they get Claw Island built up really fast. It's also kind of funny that you have a gigantic box on top, but it looks cool, I guess. And again, it's still a giant blender. All the scenes of Nigma, taking in all the brainwaves and stuff, it does have a creepy vibe to it, and the rest of the villain layer is enshrouded in darkness. What I like about this is the way this is played. I've always thought that Alfred basically is giving Dick an opening, because it's like, he already knows what needs to happen in this guy's life, and that if he discovers the Batcave, that'll force Bruce to, open up, and it will help Bruce too. Again, that's just my own personal reading, but it's like he gives him just enough time to try and do this. But again, I maybe just be reading too much into this, and you'd also think that you wouldn't just have to push on the shelf, so maybe Alfred left it open. The novelization goes a bit further, and it's that Alfred goes down, Dick sneaks in, and then sneaks in the open Batmobile while Alfred is working on something. So you see the cowling is open, so I think that may have been part of the longer version, but I may be wrong. But yeah, Dick steals the Batmobile here. I do like how he just waves and Alfred just gives him that look. But again, the staging of this scene, I've always wondered if Alfred was doing it intentionally. Another wonderful dialogue scene. And this is where Chase gives Bruce the Dream Warden. I like that her wall has this giant painting, and it's a very striking looking apartment, very stylized. I also think her Nicole Kidman's hairstyling, makeup, everything, and her wardrobe in this film, she looks fantastic and almost straight out of a 1940s film in a lot of scenes. I like how Bruce has really let down a lot of walls and is letting a lot of his internal darkness come out here, and he's literally walked out onto the terrace in the night in the darkness, but Chase is still in the light. He's also dressed in all black too, so that helps. And he feels a chill of sorts, and he takes his coat off. And this is where the notion of repressed memories comes out, which is why we're getting flashes of his childhood memories and the trauma, but it's all due to this guilt he has, which he doesn't even quite remember. And this is, ostensibly what led him to becoming Batman, which is an aspect that certain comics at this time had already played around with, that, Bruce became Batman out of fear and then became the fear, but certain storylines, which obviously inspired Batman Forever, are that Bruce became Batman most completely out of guilt, which he then finds is a misplaced guilt, but guilt nonetheless. Bruce now confronts Chase about her complete obsession with Batman, and she admits the clinical fascination, but also you can see how this, this whole sequence starts to make her allegiance switch, how she starts to care more for and see more interesting stuff in Bruce Wayne, who at first was, nothing compared to Batman. And of course, in the novelization, it spelled out a bit more that Bruce is, trying to reveal more of himself, which in the film, you can see that he wants to, but he also wants to keep himself removed. So he's doling things out, knowing that she's going to pick up on it, which again is made completely explicit in the novelization and feels it like something Batman would do. And it feels so much more completed, which I wish the film had all that stuff. And I like how they come really, really close and finally do embrace, which gets broken off by the Dick Tracy watch. But I like that this is allowed to build over multiple scenes, and it's only when Bruce starts revealing facets of himself. I love the Alfred Secret Dictionary of how to say Batman stuff when other people are around. The other car. No, sir. The other car. Now we have more of the songs from the film. This is the Offspring track, and I like the little visual touch of having the Batmobile skipping around, so you know that Dick is just going around, bombing around in the Batmobile. And we get our first glimpse of the streets of Gotham, which, it's interestingly designed, although if you look closely, there's not a lot of people around. But, it has a look of its own, and, it's everybody labels it as 100% neon, but it's not exactly. It does have some darkness, and again, Batman and Robin is a lot more rushed of a production and doesn't look anywhere near as good. It looks far more stagey than Forever does. So I think even this scene kind of works, even though it is a bit lighter tonally. And of course, if anybody knew who Dick Grayson was or read the newspaper, then they might question, well, heck, who is why is he in the Batmobile? They might put two and two together. Of course, you can also tell this is the Warner backlot, probably the famous New York City street if you can see on the studio tour. Now, here is where the neon goes to full fruition in the scene where Dick confronts the gang, all blacklit and painted and everything. Again, though, this is something he hadn't seen before, and, it's not like they did one person, they did everything. But you do get to see Dick just throw himself into danger, and later on he says, it helped him deal with his pain, and you imagine he was fighting Two-Face the whole time. You can see that he handles himself well. You can also see the action is far more fluid in practically every way than anything in the Burton films. So again, I think the Schumacher films do have the better action staging. Tim Burton always said, even in the commentaries, he said, I'm not an action guy, so it's not really what I'm known for. It's not my specialty. And Dick gets a sort of hero moment, gets to rescue the damsel and sends her off, and should just run away, but doesn't. He gets a one-liner. It's a little cutesy, but, now he's facing mortal peril because he's basically challenged a whole gang army. It's like, I guess all these people sit around and paint themselves and go stand around outside all night just so then they can mug one random person. I do like how the Batman reveal, he's just watching everything from above, and no one notices him at first, but he's tracked Dick down and just observes. And then everyone scatters, although, they could just tackle him since there's 85 of them. Now, this is the best part of the scene, where Dick just screams and starts punching Batman, and Batman takes it. And all the rage comes pouring out because now he knows that Bruce is Batman, and Batman just takes it and takes it and takes it. Again, this is a far deeper film than anybody gives it credit for. And now in the Batcave, Dick talks about his pain, his turmoil, and all he can think about is killing Two-Face. This is where you see Dick figuratively and literally, where he's standing at a precipice of where his life can go. And of course, he's literally crossing a bridge over an abyss right now. But he's caught in this in-between stage, and Bruce recognizes all of the mistakes that he made, and he sees in Dick, a younger version of himself, and he's trying to prevent him from following in his footsteps and taking lives. So that's his real insistence on not bringing Dick into the fold. He wants him to still be able to have his own life and not, throw it away like he sees that, he threw his own life away. And the dialogue here that Bruce says, about it will go this way, you make the kill, but your pain doesn't die with Harvey, it grows. This really kind of, if you want to link it back, I think it links back to Batman 89 and Bruce killing the Joker. If you want to link it directly to the Keaton films or something else. The lighting of their faces here is really well done, with one half in shadow and the other half in the light. So you see how clouded Dick's face is, just like Bruce's, and they're matched in that way. So it shows the darkness in both of them. So again, thematically, this is a great scene, and we have this weaving in of the theme that Goldenthal kind of works in for the Bruce and Dick relationship. And again, you can see the turmoil in both characters. So this is why I really love the usage of Robin in Forever and how it mirrors Bruce's own internal turmoil. And Alfred just watches over the whole thing and incorporates this into, how he deals with both of them. Because, if anyone is the psychologist of the film, it's Alfred. And there are some deleted scenes between Bruce and Dick and Alfred as well that are unfortunately dropped, some of which you do get in the deleted scenes that add a whole lot of character, both before Dick finds out that Bruce is Batman and afterwards. So again, a lot of this stuff in the finished version is a lot more under the surface. Now we're at the Nigma Tech party. This was shot at the Pantages Theater, and here we see Nigma completely made over in his I want to be Bruce Wayne guise. And in a minute, the glasses will come in and out. There's Elizabeth Sanders as Gossip Gertie, who popped up in Batman Returns, but she has this gossip reporter character for the 2 Schumacher films. Of course, she's in the film because she's the wife of Bob Kane. And I like how Nigma drops the public persona every once in a while when he talks to Sugar and when he talks to Two-Face, once Two-Face breaks in, etc. Now he comes up and you can see how he is directly competing with Bruce to the point that he is modeling his entire visage, everything, on a warped version of who he sees Bruce Wayne as, the villainous Bruce Wayne that he sees. He wants to tear him down publicly, financially, in a business standpoint, and now he will try to make Chase his conquest. And another thing from the novelization, it's not really in the film, but Bruce kind of encourages Chase to dance with him to try and get a reading on this guy. Again, there's I could go into the differences in the novelization a ton. There's so much stuff added to it. But all of it builds on the nuance of the film that's, I think, still in there, but it's not always spelled out. Now it's the improved box with the holographs. Now we have the glasses usage like Keaton does in 89 and Returns, and you'll see Nigma pull out his own Bruce Wayne glasses. So he's copied them down to the glasses when you're thinking thing. Talk about a quick gaffe. It's always made me laugh that the audience applauds before the holograph comes on when she sees all the diamonds and stuff. And here Bruce talks about the inner workings of the box and what he thinks it is, and talks about extracting images out of the mind, which shows that, again, Bruce is an intelligent man and is an intelligent businessman and is active as a person outside of being Batman, which, again, is really very much appreciated because it's very infrequent in the films. And, Keaton didn't really have that outside of a flash here and there. And you get a little bit of that with Christian Bale in the Nolan films, but it's mixed into the Bruce Wayne persona being, the douchebag playboy type. Again, this sort of being a visual with Nigma and Chase where, she's trying to get a read on him, but, that's something from some of the other script drafts and novelization. And if you're wondering how to turn it off, don't talk to the hinge lady without making sure that she doesn't have a spare. Again, it's a really nice set, nice usage of color, great production design, very visually interesting, and Goldenthal works in scoring into the background music, which is nice, so it fits the party and stuff. So Bruce is being lured in to have his mind read by the new and improved box, which, Nigma does as a way to try and destroy his enemy, not knowing, of course, that he's Batman. Of how Val's face, you can see he's just like, oh, what? And you can see him trying to put up the defenses, but of course, apparently none of that works because this can just get right through any sort of mental defenses. Although I wish there had been some more of that because Batman would have a lot of defenses. It's also really cute that this is a Sony Trinitron monitor in there because that's what anybody used in the 90s because you had to have a Sony monitor or, everything else was not as good. So now Two-Face breaks in, and this shows that, he's more of the uncontrollable, unstoppable force of the villains that you can't plan anything with because he doesn't communicate. And of course, he's ruining Eddie's big party. This snaps Bruce out of his trance, cuts off the mind read before it's done, and he's able to slip out the back. Again, in other versions, he KOs a guard there who was watching the rear exit. I love how Two-Face does all this, and he's obviously just doing this as a play on to get Batman there. He really doesn't care about anything, which is why he's like, old-fashioned, low-tech stick-up. We get the classic suiting up in emergency in the backseat. Of how Dick Grayson is confronted by his ultimate villain and then decides to try and swing in action somehow. And of course, if anybody saw this discussion going on, Eddie would be like, oh, I've got to talk to him. I've got to try and get him to leave everybody alone. And I love how he kind of breaks the fourth wall here and is like, we could have planned it. Pre-sold the movie rights. Now, the skylight breakthrough is really beautifully done, very advanced over the 89 one. But it's kind of underdone by that extra behind Chase there who goes, Batman! And the action is far more fluid here. You can tell in some shots, that it is obviously a stuntman for the heavier action. But, it's not a deal breaker, and it's obviously understandable. But it is, a tad obvious in a few of the closer shots because the stuntman's chin is so much bigger. And here you get more of the whole Alfred as the psychoanalyst of the two men that, he hides the Dick's Flying Grayson's uniform. And there we have a repeat of the Cairo Swordsman style gag from Batman 89, which you get, a few times here with the Two-Face goon with the wrist and wrist knives. Now this bit when the door closes and Batman almost gets to him, I love the little bit where Two-Face tilts his head and does the hey yeah. Why, I don't know. Just one of those random things that sticks with me. Love everybody has a sense of exhilaration because Batman saved them. Now, I love the buildup of this scene, and obviously it's where Batman does the dive off the top of the building, and while it's CG, I think it's really well laid out, and I love the approach of it, although Batman jumping off a building into a tiny little hole seems a bit like a death wish. I think there was an earlier version of this that you see in like one of the trailers or something that looks nowhere near as good. You see like a flash of it in one of the trailers. Now, this is Two-Face's attempt to kill Batman with the natural gas and the flames. And the whole thing of using the cape as a gadget is believable enough, but they also, Batman would use something like firefighters would do to combat flames. So this is, totally believable enough, and, obviously something that anybody would have trouble trying to stay alive from. And it's a believable gadget that Batman would have. And this sets up one of the most heroic shots of Batman in anything, period, when Batman charges out of the flames and the score swells. I mean, this is just, yeah. And he's breathing heavy and sets up Two-Face's, why can't you just die? That's one of the 5 or so best moments of Batman in anything is charging out of the flames, which is something Joel Schumacher specifically requested. Like, somewhere can we get Batman charging through a wall of flames? And it's a visual you don't forget. But what most people don't realize here is, Batman is, buried, and the novelization is made even more explicit that he even considers, allowing himself to die here. Like, he's not serving a purpose, and his parents' deaths are avenged, and maybe he should just, let himself die here. But he is saved by Dick Grayson. And here we have the setup of this image of the hands clasped together that goes back to the flying Graysons and the notion of brotherhood and family and trust, which carries on through the rest of their arc and is why the whole finale involves the falling down the chute and saving Robin and getting to that point where the hands are clasped together again. So, of course, Bruce has a real gratitude problem. And here Dick drops the Nightwing moniker, which is another nice nod, like the Metropolis line, to comics and comic fans. Bruce is naturally apprehensive to the point of just, I can stop you. You know, it's like this is played believably enough. They're still at odds, even though Dick just literally stepped in and saved Batman's life. In one of the earlier script drafts, there was a whole fight sequence where Dick drops down and fights off a bunch of Two-Face's thugs and stuff, which is how another way that they were unmasked in those is that they looked at Robin's fighting moves and realized that it was Dick Grayson. Now here we have Alfred sort of being the in-house analyst and talking with Bruce and, you know, trying to help him work through his feelings and what is up with Dr. Chase Meridian. Originally, this went on a bit longer, and you can see some of that in the deleted scenes, which enriches the whole thing and basically ends with, Bruce saying, I don't know who I am anymore, which further unnerves Alfred. There's a lot of Alfred getting unnerved in this film. So the film cuts here, and it's just let the lady decide, whereas originally it goes on a bit longer and is far more unsettling and revealing about Bruce's character at that particular point in time. So this is the midnight rendezvous at Chase's place, which I love the whole idea. She wakes up in the middle of the night, it's like a dream, and then Batman just shows up, and again, it's very dreamlike. But it's maybe a little much to still have this grown person throwing themselves at a costume vigilante. And this will be the point where Chase realizes that, she should be a normal person and that she's now more interested in Bruce Wayne, but, she has to make up her mind. The first draft by the Bachelors is actually, pretty much the story and structure we have in the film roughly, but the one thing they had that I thought was really not a good idea was they actually had Chase and Batman sleep together, but he keeps the cowl on, so it's very bizarre. It's alluded to, but it's there in their original script, and it's if you're reading the Bachelor script, it's the one moment where you're like, yeah, no. I like how she's having this realization, though. So, but the novelization goes a bit further, and this is the point where she goes through her own guilt and realizes, for sure that Bruce is Batman and confirms her suspicions, but she's talking to herself into a tape recorder, which she then burns. And Batman is on another rooftop monitoring her and is like, she knows. She figured it out. Good. But I do like how they keep the artifice up here since they're not doing that. And then when Batman turns around, he has the little smile, the little spark of humanity, which a lot of people like to make fun of. And of course, it's a huge internet meme, but it's a lovely little bit for Batman to have a little human moment. Bruce Wayne wins once. And here, of course, Two-Face in the film is far more of the comic book villain trope in terms of the reactions are big, but, he's the muscle villain, which, again, it's fine, but the fact that it's Two-Face and it's Tommy Lee Jones, it just leaves you wanting so much more from a character that's all supposed to be tragedy, duality, pathos, and again, completely tragic. So Riddler and Two-Face look at the scan of Bruce Wayne and see that he has an image of a bat in his head. And it's like, so now they know he's Batman because he thought about a bat once? Yeah, it's a bit much, but, ostensibly they mapped his whole brain and knew that he was Batman. But, the presentation there, it's like, then Chase should have known because he said the Rorschach was a bat. And again, for the family-friendly Batman, this is a pretty heavy scene where Bruce decides to stop being Batman because he's trying to protect Dick from following in his footsteps and give Dick his own life, and also that, he's kind of tired of being Batman, coming after Returns, and, he's tired of playing the hero for basically an ungrateful city that just has come to depend on him. But primarily this is to protect Dick and for Bruce to sort through his own demons. And again, the dark lighting playing across their faces, keeping their faces in shadow is really visually accentuating the struggles that each of them are going through. And, Dick is down here in the darkness and, has to follow Bruce back up to the main house, so it's like they're coming up out of the darkness. And you can see how desperate that Dick is here. And Bruce says, I'm going to tell her everything, which feels far more motivated than the sort of played for slight situational comedy that you get in the Batman 89 reveal scene where Bruce goes to Vicky's apartment. And, while it's a fine scene, it's like this version has so much more dramatic weight, which you get when Bruce and Chase are in the main living room here. The jack-o'-lantern and line indicating that this is Halloween, which will set up how Two-Face and Riddler break into Wayne Mansion. I've always liked how Dick goes into the Bat Vault, and he's in the Bat Cave in the darkness, and Alfred has put his uniform in between all the bat suits, and Dick just retrieves it and leaves because, there's nothing else for him here now. And he just pushes his bike out the back entrance as the music has a sort of sad march. So I always loved that idea of, Dick striking out on his own. I think this is probably the most natural of all the romance scenes in any of the 4 Bat films. It's very simple, very quiet, and very, very loose. There's not a lot of artifice going on, and by this point, Bruce is going to completely come clean. So all the outer mass and layers and armor has kind of dropped. But that gets interrupted because of the roses falling, setting off more of his flashbacks. And here we delve into them more, which is really the most you get of this in the film because all of the extra stuff was removed. So the whole notion of Bruce dealing with his internal trauma and his guilt, his repressed memory of that guilt over the death of his parents and blaming himself, and understanding who he is, who Batman is, what the Crusade is, why did he become Batman. That's the whole point of the movie. That's why the film is called Batman Forever. Why in the climax he has the line where he talks about his self-realization by the end of the film, the ending of his character arc being I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman because I choose to be, not because I have to be. That's the whole point of the film. That's why the film's called Batman Forever. So the fact that they cut out the meat of that reveal is just a bit ridiculous. So here we have the flashback really opening up, something I've never told anyone. I love how she finally just says, I'm here. Again, the notion of her going from the clinical psychologist to just a genuine human presence there, something I think is really interesting. Now Bruce is physically participating within his own memory of his parents' wake. And with his narration and physically taking the place of his child self, it finally explains these glimpses we've seen, many times. And also some of the shots are a lot clearer now, because we're not just getting a number of flashes. Here's the red book, again, his father's diary. And this would lead to the major deleted scene of the film where once the break-in happens and Bruce gets shot in the head, he actually has momentary amnesia, forgets that he's Batman, and goes back into the deep sections of the cave again, which he doesn't remember, and finds the part where he fell into as a boy, manages to find the leather journal, which had gotten lost all those years ago, and go to the last page, which he had read as a child, but finds that the pages had stuck together. So there was another entry after that saying, but Bruce's cartoon will have to wait. Our hearts are settled on Zorro, is what it says in the novelization. But, basically saying that Bruce didn't know that it wasn't his fault. They went out because his parents wanted to go out. So it's this notion that his guilt was actually misplaced, and then he's able to come to terms with who he is and what Batman is, and then remembers everything. And that's when you have the scene that a lot of people show pictures of Val Kilmer with the giant bat, very similarly designed to match this giant bat that we see coming out of the darkness. And of course, his recounting of all this is basically saying, I'm Batman. But I like that it's left unsaid, and she just kisses him instead, which, actually identifies, hey, this is the same dude. And I love how even she doesn't say anything. She just gets this look on her face, and it's all left unsaid, which is really nice and doesn't insult the audience's intelligence. So I think it's very fitting of the scene. But of course, it would be much better if all of the stuff about the major subplot of the film about Bruce's character and his character arc was still in the film, which is why you lose a lot of what Val Kilmer's emoting and doing in the film, because all that stuff has been removed. And yes, that's a bit goofy. Alfred should have realized that it's grown men doing that. And Jim stares directly at the camera there. It's a little fourth wall breaking, but it's, again, kind of blink and you miss it. It is amazing that we're finally getting an assault on Wayne Manor and Batman's identity has been discovered. So there is a nice element of danger, and it's really cool to see the Two-Face thugs come tearing into Wayne Manor. I quote the Riddler in parts of this movie quite often, can't help it, but this one especially. If I was a superhero, where would I hide? Spank me. Which is the one nod to Ace Ventura, I think, in the film. Now, this is a striking image, and if you read all the old script drafts, Penguin and Catwoman and Sam Hamm's Batman 2 did, assault Wayne Manor, but never really found out that Bruce was Batman, or especially at first, if I'm remembering correctly. But, it's always striking to see the villains get into the hero's lair and discover the secret identity and stuff. And the Batman 66 show did, got them in Wayne Manor a few times, got them in the Batcave a few times, but they never quite, discovered everything. Jim goes on a sort of comedy rampage and destroying the Batcave, which apparently had a lot of ad-libbing, like a lot of Jim's stuff that got cut down for the theatrical release. This is probably the most painful scene of the film for comic book fans, because Two-Face just sits there in a chair and flips the coin over and over till he gets a good result, which it's like, yeah, no one really understood Two-Face, did they? I guess, he's just sitting there flipping for every different occurrence, and finally, it's oh, can I shoot Bruce Wayne? Yes, okay. And you can tell that, Jim Carrey's having fun, Edward Nigma, the Riddler's having fun, because he's getting to tear apart his most hated person's toys. Again, no one really understood Two-Face in this, really. And yeah, some of this stuff is a bit much. This bit with the imitating a ball player, while it's beautifully pantomimed, it's like, that's not exactly necessary. But again, the whole notion about Edward's brain being fried as the Riddler and him being on overload the whole time and spouting all this pop culture stuff, if you look at it that way, I think it can explain all of the, for lack of a better term, the joygasm stuff, which we'll get here in a second. And, the Riddler literally destroys the Batcave and the Batmobile, and, where can Batman go from here, basically? So, it does have an upping of the stakes, which is always nice. And I like how the score builds until the final moment when Bruce gets shot in the head. It's like they're not going to escape this one. Although, again, Two-Face should not have just sat there the whole time flipping his coin. It's also an extraordinarily good shot to just clip Bruce in the head and then give him enough trauma to then, in the original shooting version, have amnesia. I love how Two-Face just dances over and he's going to shoot him anyway. At least Riddler has a reason for why the villains are leaving the hero alive. They just want to screw with him more. Like, that's, at least it's got a reason, as opposed to, as Roger Ebert always said, the talking killer syndrome, and then, always leaving the hero to escape. And again, there was an extra beat because Bruce wakes up. Alfred's looking over him, How are you, young man? You haven't called me that for a long time. Then Alfred says, the cave is destroyed. And Bruce is like, what cave? So that's another major part of the film that was, completely dropped. And you don't notice it because, you would have no idea it's supposed to be there at first. I like how we zoom in onto the eye and then pull out and the matching shot on Bruce's eye again, but obviously the axis has changed. It does give you a nice sense of the passage of time. But again, his sort of dazed look here is because he's supposed to have some form of light amnesia. And again, the sort of notion is of Alfred being much more paternal in the Schumacher films is something I really, really appreciate and wish was more obvious in the Burton films. And again, if you look at Val's performance here, he's kind of bewildered and out of it. And they took Alfred's line about another riddle and just put it in there. Because originally that came a little bit later. They shuffled it around to cut out everything that followed, which was all about Bruce's character arc. Now we're setting up the finale on Claw Island. And here they play around with the whole notion of inevitability, where she's like, Batman will come for me. I'm counting on it. There's another little deleted bit here where Riddler knocks her out with a giant syringe and says, nap time, gorgeous, which is just another one of the little trims that you've seen in other versions, and the comic version, the novelization, and it was shot. So when you have a lot of little things like that, it starts to add up. So the notion of there being a 170-minute version of Batman Forever, again, it's probably more like a working version. But if it is a complete near 3-hour version of the film, fully finished, I would not be surprised. Now here's the scene of Bruce and Alfred figuring out all the riddles, realizing that the Riddler is Edward Nigma, putting everything together and actually doing detective work. This is sorely, sorely appreciated because we get so little of this in most other Batman adaptations. All the riddles are directed to Bruce Wayne, though, and you never have the Riddler leaving riddles at the scene of his crimes. It is alluded to in some versions that he does this, like in spray paint during the robbery montage scene with Two-Face, and it's possible they shot that for the film, but it's just been left out of the theatrical edit. But, Riddler does leave the riddles for for Bruce, so you do at least get riddles, but you don't get his whole 100% obsession with puzzles because the focus is more on the box and taking over Gotham. I love the lighting here. You have the green coming off the table full of Riddler products, but it's still the dark, somber Wayne Manor. And Bruce is already geared up for action because he just has a t-shirt on. Now, this has been trimmed some because they have to go down into the Batcave, and the only thing left is the prototype sonar suit, which was originally set up earlier in the film, and he almost kills himself with the rocket boots. So that's why the line is, I'm going to test it. And yes, the bat ass shot is a dumb thing, and it should not be in the film, and it's really stupid, and it's the single worst thing in the whole film. So forget about nipples on the bat suit. The bat ass shot is just, at least it's very brief, but it's just like, why? And again, the reason why the Riddler missed these is he didn't know about the cave under the cave. So ostensibly when the Batmobile goes down on the lift, it goes down to this lower level where the Batwing and the Batboat are and the experimental area. Dick coming back and having the Robin insignia and everything, joining up with Batman is the culmination of his arc, which gets finalized by deciding to not kill Two-Face on Claw Island. But I like that this is set up that Bruce accepts him now, and Dick says, I can't promise I won't kill Harvey. A man's got to go his own way. The whole movie has built up their characters to this point, and Robin goes into the climax, still unsure of himself and not knowing what he's going to do when it comes to that moment. And there again, you have the visual metaphor of the clasped hands together. So it all fits, and it's all their character arcs have built to that moment. The Batwing is some CGI usage and I think a little bit of model work maybe. And then you have the Batboat, which will quickly get destroyed. I think it's cool that they have this two-pronged approach. So, they're coming from both arenas. I like how Gordon is just so disappointed. Of course, it's unfortunate that Gordon is such a minor character in these films. Although this moment of the Batwing coming in late and smashing through the Riddler's sky and the signal to restore the bat signal. Again, it's a great heroic image and moment. Although I don't know if Gordon would cheer. And then you get the thumbs up, which again has become another classic meme of the internet. But it's got a little bit of goofiness to it, and Gordon he's grinning like an idiot and shakes the cop's hand. It's a little much, but again, at least it builds, like the determined shot of Robin, and then the score builds up as they approach the Riddler HQ on Claw Island. And this is just a quirky thing where they play Battleship trying to destroy the Batboat. It's wacky, but it kind of has some of the Tim Burton wackiness, and I appreciate that they have fun with this, even though it's completely ludicrous that Riddler and Two-Face will sit there and play live-action Battleship. Unfortunately, they didn't sell a Battleship tie-in to Batman Forever. It's one of the few merch opportunities they didn't use. I like this game! And there goes the Batboat. It's been on screen 5 seconds. And I like that Robin's been plunged into mortal peril already. I like that Batman is looking worried and, trying to figure out what to do. Dick looks like he can get away, and then he's confronted by, a whole miniature army of frogmen. So, again, he's outnumbered already, again, and in trouble. So Batman will have to figure out how to save him, and in the meantime, gets slightly distracted, and then the Batwing gets hit by... I don't even know what this is supposed to be, the sort of power overflow that hits the wing. Of course, that's a CG shot, but it's a super fast moment, and it comes right into camera, but it's very quickly over, and then we're right back into actual physical models. And I do like how the Batwing converts into the Bat-Sub, very much a versatility thing, something that Batman would do, and then Batman just decides to leave it anyway and just shoot out. A lot of people will say all the vehicles is to sell toys, which I can understand that. Batman Forever did have a significant merchandising campaign and a wonderful, incredible toy line, but it didn't have all the merchandisers it could have. It wasn't as big as it could have been because people were leery after Batman Returns, which is why they all came back on Batman and Robin. And coming up here when they climb on the island, we have the one definite nod to Batman 66 where they give Robin the Holy Rusted Metal line, which is... It's a knowing wink-wink line at the audience. It's definitely a nudge-nudge moment. It doesn't overplay it. And Batman literally does the what? The whole island's full of holes, holy. I just really appreciate it because I love Batman 66, and that's what everybody will... Still to this day, it comes up in conversation, even with Darker Batman, and I like that they gave one little nod towards it. Any more than that would have been too much, but, we got the one line. And now they're separated again, and Robin is on his own and faces, mortal peril. And so now, in addition to everything, Batman has to try to get to him to, at least keep an eye on his new untested partner. I don't think Robin quite gets the sign language. I love the swirling green light on the outside. It definitely gives you an interesting visual contingent to the exterior, particularly when Robin is fighting Two-Face. Now we're in the Death Trap Tower, all designed to basically perplex Batman and It's sort of the forerunner to the Riddler death rooms, puzzle rooms in Arkham City, which I always thought was an interesting thing. And here's Robin about to get his revenge, or so he thinks. And the moment here where Robin stands over Two-Face and the cape blows out with the swirling green lights, it's the definition of a hero shot. But you can feel the notion of revenge pulsating in the background of the scene. So, he nearly does almost let Two-Face go over the edge. The death trap looms ever nearer. And this is where you see Dick's character arc end and culminate in his decision to save Two-Face's life. Whereas, 20, 40 minutes ago, he would have literally pushed him off. I think this is one of the better Two-Face moments in the film, for sure. But, again, you wish it was more comic accurate, for sure. And although Robin does kind of look stupid here because Two-Face just pulls a gun out. So again, the stakes are raised even higher for Batman. He's now having to rescue two people. Again, without the earlier scene of the rocket boots, you have to wonder what exactly he's doing here and why would his suit have rocket boots in it. But yes, that was the thing that almost killed him when he tested it earlier in the original story. And of course, it's not quite clear, but basically Batman turns Riddler's trap on itself and manages to, one up and do the unexpected, which is what Batman would seek to do. So thematically, I love everything about this whole setup, even though it's very intimate. There's not a whole bunch of thugs or goons or anything, and it's very straightforward, and it's about rescuing both souls, if at all possible. The design of Riddler's costume and mask and everything is really great, although I wish he was just still in the traditional Riddler outfit. I think Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face comes across better when he's doing the Harvey side, and there are moments, particularly his very last scene, where he comes across with the right pathos. So it makes you wish that the character could have been written comically, comic accurate. And, again, I think the casting choice of Joel Schumacher was spot on. I wish that Two-Face was more like Two-Face in the film and had more of an active role instead of being just the muscle villain. I like the dialogue here because it shows just how far Edward has gone. Was that over the top? I can never tell. And Batman is having to try and calmly assess the situation. Another thing that's not quite made clear is the floor is actually a hologram, so if Batman moves, it's going to drop him right back down, which is why it kind of shimmers, and once he does the sonar suit and starts, everything starts breaking down. So that's why he just dives off at the after everybody, because, again, the whole thing is a giant death trap, and everything around him is a floor hologram. I like how Riddler talks about their inner thoughts because he's apparently boxed them, which means that he stuck a box on Robin in like 10 seconds while Batman flew up here. Again, the mixture of megalomania and pop culture references, I think, alludes to the fact just how far Edward's mind has gone. There's some other drop dialogue earlier with Chase and Edward when she's tied up on the couch where she's like, "You're frying your brain," and he's like, "I'm the smartest man in the world. What are you talking about?" And, of course, having to choose between the two people linked to both sides of his life, links to each villain being a villain for each side of his life, which ties into his character struggle and arc through the film. And in trying to rescue and managing to rescue them both. It's a physical and symbolic rendering of his acceptance of his life as Bruce Wayne and Batman. And even though the effect itself is a little dodgy with some of the background plates, it's getting at the notion of Batman trying to do and doing the impossible and pushing himself further, which I think is intrinsic to the character and the core of the character. So this and the setup here with Batman giving the Riddler a riddle of his own is I think priceless, even if it's simple, because the idea is not to give a crazy riddle, but to distract and to try and play him and his own game. Although you think the Riddler would have hidden the apparatus and not just put it straight over his head. But Batman has to engage the sonar suit to, sort of track it down, or at least I'm postulating that. And it does sort of give you the image of the comic Batman with the eyepieces. And there you saw the floor sizzle out. So there's that floor hologram I was talking about a minute ago. This is kind of a creepy moment as a kid when the sort of brain drain happens and Edward's head gets all misshapen and everything, as all of the feedback basically fries his brain completely. And here you see he presses the button, but then there's a slight delay, which is what causes Robin to drop first. And that slight delay is alluded to being the reason why Batman can save them both. And again, it's defying the laws of physics, sure, but it's also about emotional closure and, again, trying to do the impossible. That the shot of her being stopped there, the background, is where it gets a little dodgy. Some of the earlier drafts, Robin manages to stop himself by wedging in the wall, which explains how Batman can get there. But there's just something about this moment that it's always stuck with me. And again, it's about the idea of doing the impossible and overcoming the obstacle. It's a physical manifestation of his character arc of having to accept the aspects of his duality. And it's, of course, beautifully, wonderfully heroic, which the heroic side of Batman doesn't always get pursued in particularly the modern adaptations, which are all about being dark and gritty, but, it's also the character is supposed to be heroic, at least somewhat. Now, this is the final scene of Two-Face, and, he's basically set up to be hoisted on his own petard, and, basically Batman sort of kills him with having all the coins, even though it's technically Two-Face's fault. Now, when he drops everything here, and it's Harvey talking, you can see Tommy Lee Jones being a great Two-Face with the moments like this, where it goes quiet, and you can see how it would have worked. Now, while I like the idea of him going after all the coins, and the score is really great, and you get the great reaction shot of Robin, even though basically his revenge has just been stolen. The novelization does it much better. Robin literally yells at Two-Face and, totally tears him apart with his words. And then Two-Face, is like, "We were right. You ripped our own heart out. You owe us," and then commits suicide, which is a complete turn of events and so much thematically better, and also makes sure that Batman actually doesn't kill anybody in the movie. So we have a proper no-kill Batman that I wish it was in the film. I really do. It's the best part of the novelization, and I encourage you to read it if you haven't. But it still works in the film, and I like the image of Batman hurling all the different coins, although his intention probably wasn't to kill Two-Face. And here we have Edward and his final guys, where he looks all deformed and everything. But here's the key line: "I had to save them both. I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be, but because I choose to be." That's the point of the film. That's why it was so harmful to remove all of the Bruce backstory that they removed. And I like the notion that Edward now sees Batman as a demonic figure and sees the bat that haunted Bruce's dreams. Here we have the revamped Arkham Asylum finally on screen for the first time, and this is where the film would have opened. So it would have been an idea of bookends originally, opening and closing in Arkham Asylum. As a nice touch, the head doctor here is named Dr. Burton and has sort of Tim Burton-ish looking hair, and the setting looks very much more similar to the Tim Burton Batman films. So it's a nice little illusion, I think. Nice little nod to Tim Burton there. So Chase is going to talk to Edward, who has been claiming he knows Batman's true identity. And the idea is that, what has he retained in his memory? Does he remember anything? Does he really know who Batman is? And, of course, it's established that he's completely gone mentally. And this does have a spooky vibe like the original opening in Arkham would have. So, again, this kind of stuff alludes to the fact that the original cut of the film was a lot darker. And even in the theatrical cut, it's not 100% a family-friendly movie all the way through. There's still an intrinsic darkness. And, if you look at the story beats and the characters, it's not a 100% family-friendly thing. It's not what you would have written or done. I love how Bruce is just standing outside in the dark, and Alfred's waiting there. And this is setting up a similar closing to, kind of what we got in Batman 89 with Vicky and Alfred in the car. And there was a little extra bit shot that's in the deleted scenes where they're kind of driving off, and they sort of have a melancholic line back and forth, which I love the dialogue in it, but it's really not necessary. And then Bruce giving back the Dream Warden, is again another physical sign that, thank you for giving me a new dream, that, his character arc has been fulfilled and his issues have been resolved, and he now continues to be Batman because that's just who he is. Alfred looking a little on the pervish side as he watches them, and it's just enough of a knowing line. Don't work too late. I like the close-up on Bruce here with the Batman March coming in very triumphantly and leading into the final shot of the film, which is this beautiful shot of Batman and Robin finally united on screen, running towards the camera away from the bat signal. Of course, the cowl weaves a little bit, but it's a beautiful image, a great moment to go out on as they completely cover the screen in darkness to wipe into the end credits. Originally, they did prepare and shoot a scene to match the Batman 89 style with Batman and Robin standing on the rooftops. That was shot, but they then decided to go with that image instead. We go into the end credits, but instead of having music from the score, we have the fantastic U2 Hold Me, Throw Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, an outtake from the Zooropa sessions that became the key song of the accompanying music of the film, and is one of the best U2 songs of all time, for sure. And so it's one of the great things to come out of this film that this song did not get lost into the vault and not ever released. But of course, Seal's Kiss from a Rose kind of overtook it and became the most famous song from the film. And that was put in because Joel Schumacher loved the song, wanted to put it in the film somewhere, but couldn't fit it in, and just decided, well, we'll just tack it on the very end of the end credits. So when I was a kid, I loved both songs, but I wanted to finish the U2 song, and it just fades out. And that was what made the song Kiss from a Rose become popular, because it didn't chart the first time. So the reissue and then Joel Schumacher shooting the Batman Forever music video for it is what made the song successful. So CL always publicly thanked Joel Schumacher for doing that. But it is a little bit of a stylistic shift because, the Burton films always started and most of the credits were the Danny Elfman music to play you out. So that is Batman Forever, and that's me babbling on over it. So again, I wanted to do this commentary to follow the Burton films. I still love this film. It's got a lot of great ideas in it, and I kind of wanted to be a bit on the defensive side because I get so tired of people just grouping it in with Batman and Robin and not taking the film seriously or really giving it a chance. Again, I think it's interesting as a film because it tries to do elements of Batman on the big screen that pretty much nobody else has tried. It is a bit more straightforward. It does have a different design. It does have some lighter moments, but it's still at its core a very dark film about character. And if the additional materials had been left in, I do think it would be a better film. I don't think it would be perfect. I think it would still have some of the same issues for sure, but I think all the editing that went on last minute and the shuffling around and stuff, I think really kind of messed with the overall flow and the original intent of the film. So hopefully it can come to pass that we can get the Schumacher cut or the longer, darker version of the film finally released, and that might spur people to come back to the film, look at it again, and actually give it another go-round with an open mind. Because I think when you go in with an open mind, it still plays really well, and it's still a really interesting, fun experience, especially on the big screen. I would love to be able to see this in a theater again, for sure. Of course, we have Kiss from a Rose, which actually, it does manage to somehow fit the film, but, it's like, I don't know where you would have put it in, so the end credits makes perfect sense. I do like that we do have the bat symbol in the background. That does give it that iconography that you didn't get in the end credits of the Burton films. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me babble on. Again, this is a film I have great fondness for, great childhood memories, and I still enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed watching it with me and maybe took a second look, and we'll come back to this film later on with an open mind. And with that being said, this has been my commentary for Batman Forever, and humbly yours, I am the Motion Picture Analyst.